30 seconds. 20 seconds. 10 seconds.
Hi,
My name's J.C. McCauley.
I'm Naisha McCauley, and you're watching AccessTV.org.
Good morning again. This is Jonathan Small, host and producer of Face to Face. Face to Face is one of two different programs that I have the pleasure of hosting and producing live every single week at AccessTV.org studios. Face to Face is a show that's designed to ask the guests the hard questions and give you, the viewers, the answers and information that you deserve to know. This morning on Face to Face, we have a returning guest who I had the pleasure of interviewing in the first quarter of 2024 on the All About You talk show. And this morning, I have the pleasure of interviewing her on, I guess, during the fourth quarter of the Face to Face talk show. This guest brings a lot of information, proactivism towards social justice issues, economic issues, political issues, spiritual issues. She is really a tremendous individual and is doing tremendous things in North Carolina. The guest this morning is no other than the president of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg NAACP chapter down in Charlotte, North Carolina, no other than Reverend Corin Mack. Good morning, Reverend Corin. How are you doing?
Grand Rising. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. Thank you for having me.
Okay. Reverend Corin, do you want to jump right into the topics, or do you want to let people know a little bit more about your background briefly?
Well, I think we should go into the topics. I'm not that important. I think that the issues are. So let's just get into the issues.
Okay, well, one of the main issues throughout the United States, and this topic is related now towards North Carolina, is the racial wealth gap that exists. And for people who don't understand or don't know exactly what the racial wealth gap is, could you kind of let people know a little bit about what you know of the racial wealth gap that exists in North Carolina?
Well, in North Carolina, I can start with saying that the poverty rate in 2022 and 2023 has been 12.8%, which means about 1.3 million North Carolinians are living in poverty.
Mm-hmm.
And so let's start from that basis, that 1.3 million people are living in poverty in the state of North Carolina.
But Reverend Corin, how do you break that down towards the different races? Like the Asians have one of the highest per capita income throughout the United States, and I believe in North Carolina, isn't it followed by the white population? And I'm not sure if the black or the Hispanic population is third or fourth, and I believe the American Indian population is fifth. Is that an accurate assessment of the racial wealth gap in North Carolina, or is it a little bit more to it than just that?
No, it's pretty similar across the board. I think that Charlotte follows the norms as the national poverty rate and wage gap. Of course, you have to add in gender.
Mm-hmm.
You know, women in North Carolina whose salary may be $904 per week is about 85.8% of the median weekly earnings versus a man who's $1,053. Now you have to also add in the conversation regarding wages in North Carolina versus other states. It varies, obviously, but at the end of the day, if you are a person of color and female, the likelihood is that you're not making enough money to provide for your family, which is why a lot of women of different races of color are working more than one job.
Well, what is some of the factors that contribute, let's say, towards the racial wealth gap? Is it higher education? Is it the networking system that exists? Is it political? Is it other factors that is not really being reported? Is it like home ownership? Is it taxes? I mean, what is the main or one of the main driving factors that is contributing towards the racial wealth gap in the state of North Carolina?
What I can tell you is that we did a study in 2016 through 2018 regarding economic inequity in the state of North Carolina. And what was found was that at that time, if you were Black and born poor, you had a 99% chance of dying poor. We were 50th out of 50 in the country for Black mobility. So I want you to look at it from that perspective. Yes, we've moved up the ladder since that time through some of the initiatives that we put in place in North Carolina. But at the end of the day, we have to be honest with ourselves that race plays a huge part in economic inequity. That implicit bias is as harmful as direct racism. And sometimes even more so because you're not even aware, that's why it's called implicit, that you have bias towards a specific group of people, whether it's race-based or gender-based. And of course, in my personal belief, the system is working as designed. We have to keep in mind that in the southern regions, for almost four centuries, Black people, for the most part, were enslaved. We tend to want to move away from that factor, but that factor absolutely plays a part in your ability to build wealth. And I know that a lot of people like to bring up, well, there's Black millionaires. There is, but that's not the norm.
Well, let me ask you something. I mean, you're originally from Harlem, New York, and like a lot of people throughout the country from the Northeast and let's say California and other parts of the country, they are looking at North Carolina as one of the fastest growing states towards a destination. How are the realtors and the people that's selling North Carolina selling to cities like Charlotte and Raleigh as two of the fastest growing cities throughout the country as so much of a magnet place to move to and invest to if there's so much of a racial wealth gap? Because people would assume, well, if this place has a negative image of a racial wealth gap, why would I want to pack up my bags in such high numbers and relocate to North Carolina?
Well, one of the reasons because North Carolina is beautiful. Charlotte is beautiful. I moved here because it was beautiful, and our taxes at the time versus the taxes in New York City was such a great difference. I was like, oh, I'm leaving New York. The taxes are just ridiculous in New York City for my home in New York City versus what I paid for the home that I purchased here in North Carolina. The other thing is most people don't even look at the wealth gap because when they're moving into another state, they're usually coming with their income. I did when I came here. I came with my New York income.
Right.
And so it didn't directly affect me. And it still doesn't, as it does other people who are born and raised here in the state of North Carolina. But nonetheless, this is a beautiful place to move. I would not tell anyone not to move here. I love my home. I just love all the trees and the grass and the beauty of North Carolina. It really is a beautiful state to move to. What I will say is this, that people need to truly do research no matter where they move to ensure that they're moving in a place that's going to keep them economically sound. My last point that I want to make is this. I believe that Charlotte is doing much better, and I believe that they're going to do far better over the next 5 to 10 years because of the conversations we have had, the honest, transparent, authentic conversations we've had about the wealth gap and about the necessity of us doing more for people who have the least.
Well, let's utilize Charlotte as one example. If you have, let's say, a social economic structural division, and you have areas like North Charlotte, West Charlotte, East Charlotte that seems to be below the poverty rate average. And then you have Ballantyne, you have certain parts of Uptown, I believe South Park and other areas throughout North Carolina, Myers Park, that seems to be very wealthy and developed. Is that one prime example, let's say you can market as part of a wealth racial gap factor, or is it something else that is contributing to keeping people at a such lower level of the social economics scale?
Again, property ownership, of course, helps to build wealth. But when you look at the pay rate in the Charlotte area versus some other states, that contributes to low wealth. It just does. If you're only making $8 an hour, the probability is that you're working more than one job, working long hours. We are in a right to work state. It's not a union state. As you know, union states tend to make more money because unions have the ability to collectively bargain, to create opportunities to make more money and to get more benefits. All those things are a factor. But again, we tend to not want to have the conversation about race. When you talk about Charlotte, it is glaring to see how our white counterparts are doing far better than most of our Black people and Asian people and Latino people in the Charlotte area. At the end of the day, predominantly Black communities or historically Black communities are not getting renovations to their homes like others. And then you have developers, predominantly white developers, moving into these particular areas and gentrifying those areas, building homes that are $400,000 to $500,000 homes, which would, cause your taxes to be raised. And if you're not making a good wage, you can't afford to pay more taxes. All those things play a part in how we look economically, and are we actually economically sound?
Okay, Reverend Corin, last week there was a one-day strike at Charlotte Douglas International Airport, and I believe there was an issue towards the wages levels that some of the employees at Charlotte Douglas International Airport is earning. I believe these were janitorial positions, ramp agent positions, wheelchair passenger service positions, and those workers, I believe, fall under the minimum wage guideline in North Carolina. But let's just say, for the sake of it, okay, you have employees that work at Charlotte Douglas International Airport. Wouldn't it be fair to say that the air traffic controllers, the people who run the administration levels at Charlotte Douglas International Airport, wages will automatically earn more because those are higher skilled technical jobs? And let's say, and I'm not trying to put any of the employees down, but let's just say, for the sake of it, you could easily, as an employee, replace a ramp agent, replace a janitorial worker a lot easier than you would be able to replace an air traffic controller. So how much do, again, training and education contributes towards the racial wealth gap, utilizing that group of workers at Charlotte Douglas International Airport?
I think training and education, clearly it does play a part in and how much you get paid. I mean, that just makes sense. But I want to go back to when Reagan dismantled the air traffic controllers. They were replaced, weren't they?
Right.
So we have to remember that during COVID, we realized that all of these jobs that we thought were, menial jobs and anybody can be replaced, were considered to be essential workers. All of them. We didn't see any difference in our wonderful medical practitioners or the person working at McDonald's. Both of them were essential to us. The person working at Walmart, that person was essential to us. And I'm of the belief that we need to hold all workers at a high esteem and respect all workers, because every one of them are doing a service to ensure that we are all living better and doing better. I'm not saying that an air traffic controller should be making the same wages as a janitor. No, I'm not saying that. But a janitor's job is as unsafe in many times, in many instances, because they too are picking up waste, human waste, right? Sometimes unsafe situations where they're cleaning up someone else's, human fluids, feces, all these things. We tend to not look at it from a larger scope. I do. As a former union vice president, I always look at the importance of every single position and how that position plays a part in ensuring that we all are better in this country.
Well, Reverend Corin, I think some of the people, I forgot the name of the two companies that represent the workers that were protesting for the strike. But I think isn't the main sticking point is that the employees want a union implemented at that particular facility, or is it something else that you think the workers are fighting for beyond just a union?
I think there's a lot of things. I think that they want to be treated with respect and dignity. I think that the wages is a huge part. They want to be paid a living wage so that they don't have to work 2 and 3 jobs or work longer hours. I think that having a union would help them get the benefits, all the benefits, including health care and other benefits they desire. I think that all workers in this country, at minimal, should have health care. So I think all those play a factor in why they struck. But most people go on strike not as a first choice, but as their last opportunity to be respected. And I think that's where these workers are at this time.
So towards the legislation process, let's say in North Carolina, are they constantly, or they looking into doing anything to address and fix the racial wealth gap, or is the legislative in North Carolina basically ignoring this issue and not really taking it that serious?
I'm not sure if they're not taking it serious. I haven't heard of any legislation of late that's going to directly address this issue, but I can say this. Again, we are in a right to work state. And when you understand that this is how it's been for centuries, you understand that the employer has all power. They can terminate you without cause, which is very different from a union state, where you have some rights. You have an opportunity to go through a step hearing, and a grievance process. You do not have that in the state of North Carolina. You do have the opportunity to go to an EEOC, and depending on your employment, you can also go to the Labor Department, the Department of Labor, but you don't have the same rights as a right to work state, as a union right state.
And again, I believe it's very unlikely that North Carolina is going to be moving towards a unionization anytime soon. So that means the only other factor could possibly be, let's say, raising the minimum wage in North Carolina. And I'm not even sure that would be enough, but let's just say for the sake of it, the minimum wage in North Carolina could be risen to $15 to $16 an hour. That still doesn't guarantee you that the workers will have any benefits, but that will just increase the weekly salary. Is that something that you think should be a starting point maybe in North Carolina, raising the minimum wage level?
I do. I think that the Federal Reserve needs to look at raising the minimum wage across the country, but specifically in North Carolina. If we raise the minimum wage, or even begin to look at a wage from a living wage perspective, so that every position in North Carolina would make more money for the work that they're actually doing, I would be happy. I look at it from this perspective. Without the workers, this country doesn't move. Right. We have to pay more respect to the workers. It doesn't mean that I don't believe in capitalism. I believe that employers and business owners have the right to make their money, but at what cost? That's my question. At what cost?
Reverend Corin Mack, if you look at one of the strongest areas, and people who might not be totally aware, it might appear that North Carolina is a real urban type of state, but it's really more of a rural state. It has a lot of rural areas, although you have cities like Charlotte, Raleigh, Asheville, Wilmington, Greensboro, Winston-Salem, but it has a tremendous amount of rural areas, and that's, I don't think, has completely changed. How does the rural poverty affect, let's say, the racial wealth gap that consists in North Carolina as well?
I think that the real poverty is what causes the rise in our percentage. The percentile in rural poverty is much higher than it is in urban. And I think that people don't realize that. I want you to think about someone who may live in a rural area. They might not even have broadbanding. So their children have to go and sit in uh, McDonald's or Starbucks to do their homework. Can you imagine that? I mean, this is what we're dealing with. We're dealing with people who may not have electricity for months on end when there's a major storm like the one we just went through in Asheville and in Buncombe County. For months, maybe over years, to be living in a state of despair. And that's why poverty is so damaging, so traumatic. It's long-lasting trauma to families.
Right.
In this country, we should not have anyone born and raised here living in poverty. But I want to talk about North Carolina specifically, where we know that we are the second largest banking system in the country, maybe even the world.
Right.
No one should be living in poverty in this state. No one. And we have a responsibility, all of us, to come together to figure out ways to ensure that people are living a better quality of life.
Well, I don't want to contradict you or contradict the subject matter, but you did say that you have no problem with capitalism. Doesn't capitalism in our country always produce a higher level of a small percentage of people earning a high wage towards a large percentage of people earning a low wage? And if you have a capitalistic society or a capitalistic country, can they work? And I think I asked this question to somebody else. Let me ask it to you. Can a socialist structure and a capitalistic structure really work together when you are producing that type of mindset and that type of structure?
If you remember, I said I have no problem with a capitalist concept and an employer and a business owner making money, but at what cost?
Right.
My belief is this: yes, make your money, create your wealth, but not on the backs of the people who actually create your wealth. Pay them well, respect them, and respect the work that they do, because what they're doing is providing for you and your family.
Okay.
So I believe in us sharing in the wealth. So it's okay to be a capitalist. If that's what you're about, that's fine. That's not my thinking, but if that's what you're about, that's fine. But I also believe that we need to respect the actual workers who help provide for you and your families.
Well, how does the Research Triangle area in the Raleigh-Durham, Chapel Hill area, is that somewhat of a structure that can kind of reduce and equalize the wealth gap? Because if you have a high level of research and development, medical institutions, and you're looking for the best talent, does that also trickle down? Let's say the higher wealth trickles down from the Research Triangle development area down to the lower custodial warehouse security worker? Or is that still a form of capitalism? The people with the high levels of education will earn a high level of wages, and the people who work at the lower level of the workforce in the Research Triangle development area will continue to work at minimum wage or lower wages?
I think that the system is working as designed. So if you build a system that says that as a white male with the master's degree, you are entitled to get paid this amount of money, but as a Black female with the same degree, you're entitled to make this amount of money. That's what the system is going to do. And that's exactly what's happening.
Yeah.
We don't talk about it, but you can have two people doing the exact same job with very similar backgrounds, making very disparate pay.
Well, I'm not going to dispute that doesn't exist, and I'm pretty sure as the president of the NAACP chapter in the Charlotte, North Carolina area, you do your homework and you are definitely proactive out there. But I would also say that I would still rather and you could agree or disagree, weigh the odds that if you have more education, you have more training and information, and you know how to utilize it, the odds are that you can do better off in not just North Carolina, but throughout the country than you can without it. And I say that to say, where does the K through 12 public school systems play a factor in, let's say, the racial wealth gap that exists in the state of North Carolina as well?
Well, let me just first push back on just a little bit. I prefer to stay within the Charlotte-Mecklenburg or the North Carolina area.
Okay.
But I want to push back a little bit on your statement, because I think in the past that may have been more true.
Mm-hmm.
We know we can look at the political arena or any other arena right now and see people who are less qualified, far less qualified, holding very, very high positions.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And most of them are white males.
Okay.
So that's why I always go back to race, because as Black people, we feel uncomfortable about talking about race and racism in this country, but I'm not.
Mm.
It plays a huge part in what is happening every single day to us. Now I'm going to segue into the conversation around education K through 12.
Mm.
Even in that system, in Charlotte, I want to talk about Charlotte-Mecklenburg specifically, children of color, specifically Black children, in the same system for years were not getting the same treatment. Now we have a new superintendent who's doing a phenomenal job trying to change that, but predominantly white schools in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg area were getting funding, getting renovations, getting new pools, Olympic-sized pools, new gyms, new technology, where Black schools, 28 predominantly Black schools of predominantly Black students, gave nothing.
Mm.
Okay? I had to fight to get a new track at Harding High School, where the #1 track runner in the state, but also in the country, went to school. And she had to be bused to another school, to predominantly white school, to train herself. That made no sense to me.
Mm.
When you had a Black school, a historically Black student school, with a track in total disrepair, in an unsafe condition, it was me and our branch that fought to make that happen. And I thank God for the Superintendent Crystal, who stepped up and said, you know what, let's do something about it. Her and her team put in the money and had that track put in, a brand new track, gave funding to renovate the school. And that's the kind of things that has to happen across the board in CMS, in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg school systems. And so that's a glaring situation where we saw where predominantly white schools had everything and Black schools did not. And that goes with textbooks, new technology, with the level of teachers that they bring into the school system, all those things. We have to be honest about the fact that race plays a huge part in what's happening in this country. It plays a huge part in what's happening here in the state of North Carolina as well.
Well, Reverend Corin, you answered part of my next question. I was going to ask you, is the Charlotte-Mecklenburg NAACP organization, a chapter, desperately needed, and what are you currently doing towards working towards a solution towards some of these issues that we're discussing towards the racial wealth gap? And you basically gave an answer. Should the NAACP and Charlotte collaborate? If they're not collaborating with other organizations, let's say like the Urban League that exists in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg, or is this like two different types of issues? When you get into what the historical beginning of what the NAACP was about, of social justice, civil rights issues, does this racial wealth gap really fall into, let's say, a civil rights issue, or that's designed for the NAACP? Or is it something that's more of an economic issue that's designed, let's say, more for the Urban League? Or is it a combination of both?
It's a combination of both. I actually partnered with the Urban League. I partnered with the ACLU. I partnered with Democracy NC and North Carolina Black Alliance and North Carolina Disability Acts. I partner with other organizations because I think we're stronger together. The NAACP has somewhere between 13 to 17 different committees, depending on what a branch does. We have an economic committee. We have a workers' rights committee. We have a workforce development committee. Those committees are combined. But we have an education committee and a health and health wellness committee, several committees that directly address all the issues that may fall under civil rights. When we talk about civil and human rights, that encompasses all other things that affect your life every single day. And the NAACP has done a phenomenal job of creating committees and committee chairpersons to work alongside the presidents of each branch to ensure that we are addressing those issues. Now, what I will say, to be fully transparent, that all branches are not made equal. So they may not be doing the same work, but I believe that the vision and the mission and the dream of the NAACP is still very much alive, and that we are doing the work.
Well, let me ask you another question about, let's say, the racial wealth gap that exists in North Carolina. If you had a magic wand or crystal ball and you wanted to start with one major factor towards addressing and fixing and preventing this problem, would you attack it directly towards the economic structural level, or would you attack it towards the political structural level in the state of North Carolina?
I think it would be both.
Be both.
You can't do one without the other. You would need both. And you would need a third factor, which is education.
Right.
People have to be informed and educated. They need to understand they have a responsibility to play into this work, to be a part of this work, to be engaged in this work, and to want to do better. I don't believe in giving handouts. I believe in giving hand ups. And so I like to give people the tools and the information that they do the work, right?
Yeah.
So that it's sustainable.
Well, one thing I would say, and you mentioned the three factors, and if I had a magic wand and I wanted to even address or fix a problem here locally, I would say you're right. The economic issue, the political issue, the educational issue, the health issue, which people may sometimes overlook, and I would also say the public safety issue. Because sometimes these other factors towards, let's say, public safety and the health factor, if you have mental illness issues, you have substance abuse issues, you have the criminal justice issue, the criminal justice system issues. I don't know if that plays a direct role in the racial wealth gap, or it does play a direct role. So how I guess what I'm asking you is, how do you see, let's say, other areas of public safety, the criminal justice system, and the health system in North Carolina playing a role in the racial wealth gap?
Well, I mean, let's talk about the incarceration of men of color, whether you're Latino, Black, or some other. When you begin to look at the fact that if you're a felon, oftentimes you don't even have an opportunity to get an interview for a job. In Charlotte-Mecklenburg, we were able to remove that question. It's called ban the box, right? So you wouldn't be asked right off the bat about your incarceration for any reason. But this may be a little bit too political, but I'm wondering if we should just remove that question altogether when we just elected a 34 count felon. Okay, just saying.
Right.
Anyway, at the end of the day, Black men and Black women and others who have felons or have felonies had a hard time not only finding employment, but even getting housing. When you have a felony on your record in the state of North Carolina, you can be excluded from even getting housing. So that felony affects you a lot more deeper than people think. And I'm a person who believes that people should have an opportunity to evolve. So they may have erred, they may have done some crime, in their youth and done their time. When they came out, if the system truly is to rehabilitate, why are we still holding them accountable?
Mm.
It's something they did 20 years ago.
Right.
Why is it so difficult for them to get employment or get housing? So I really believe that we need to begin to look at that. I think that also, when we look at education, I am a proponent of looking at a person's experience. So if a person has experience in doing something, they're probably going to be more likely to do a better job than someone who's been educated. You may be well read, but you may not be able to do the actual task. So I look at both. And I think that most employees need to begin to look at both. In this country, we have a tendency to put a lot of stock in someone's degrees. But because someone matriculates through the education system doesn't mean they're smart, you know.
Mm-hmm.
They simply pass.
Right.
And doesn't mean that they have the ability to do a job well. So I really want us to begin to look at the whole person and their life experiences.
Well, Reverend Corin, as far as Charlotte, North Carolina, I believe the murder rate could be getting close to 100. I'm not exactly sure, but I know it's pretty high. But then realtors and business people will tell you Charlotte has a population of over 800,000 people. So we have a small homicide rate if you total the whole population. But at the same time, when you hear the reports of the homicides that continues to plague certain areas in Charlotte, is that really just one segment of a race of people who are really being killed and being killed by other people? And would it be fair to say it's mostly black and brown people in Charlotte that's being victimized by gun violence?
Unfortunately, that's a factual statement. It's predominantly people of color, black and brown people, who are being victimized by black and brown people.
Mm-hmm.
But I can tell you that, you know, when you look at all the stats, white on white crime is as high as black on black crime. That's why I don't like to use that term,
Right.
black on black crime.
Right.
Because we very rarely talk about white on white crime. We very rarely talk about the white 18-year-old that killed 17 people for no reason.
Right.
Total strangers, right?
Yeah.
Versus, you know, person who kills someone in the heat of a moment or through a robbery. All of it's bad. All of it needs to end.
Right.
And, you know, what our Charlotte-Mecklenburg branch has decided to do, we actually go into the high school. We go to the alternative school, which is Turning Point, and we teach young people who are now suspended, long-term suspended because of violence, conflict resolutions, self-love, cultural awareness, civic engagement, right? And begin to have real conversations with them about how they should be interacting with someone, even when they're angry, especially when they're angry. I think that it's important that we begin to talk to our youth because we're allowing social media to train them. It's our responsibility, the entire village, to train them, to teach them better.
Right.
And so that we decided to do that, and we've been doing it for the last 3 years.
And one thing, Reverend Corin, I'm glad you clarified the matter of you don't like to utilize that terminology, black on black crime, because, you know, more white people will kill other white people, probably more Hispanic people or other races will kill their own. But I was just trying to indicate, let's say if you have 100 homicides in Charlotte, or approaching, let's say, 100 homicides, it needs to be examined out of the 100 homicides, who is the people that are being killed? And if they are the majority black and brown people, then that is a major problem that we have to still look at. I mean, we can look at it as a human rights problem, a human being has lost his life, or we can mix it up and say it's a black person that has been killed and there's other black people that are caught up into this type of criminal mindset. I don't think it's a simple one-way approach, but I just wanted to state the facts. When you talk about 100 homicides in Charlotte, it's not the majority of white people that are being killed or Asian people that are being killed. It's the majority of black and brown people that are being killed in Charlotte, North Carolina, when you look at those numbers.
Absolutely. You're absolutely correct, which is why I said, you know, that what you said was a fact. And that's why we went into this program. We started this program, Circles of Care, to try to directly affect it, because the other factor is the perpetrator, as law enforcement would call them, of these crimes are usually young people between the ages of 14 and 20 years old. Young Black men killing young Black men. That needs to stop.
Yes. And that's a good leadership quality for you to address and state that wrong is wrong, no matter how you want to look at it. As we're getting close to the end of our program, do you feel kind of optimistic or encouraged that the racial wealth gap is going to be closed in North Carolina or Charlotte anytime within the next 5 years? Or honestly, do you think this is just going to be another long-term problem that the state of North Carolina, like other places throughout the country, are going to continue to be dealing with?
I'm going to be very transparent with you. I am very concerned about where we will go in North Carolina because of the makeup of our state legislation today. But I believe that I'm hopeful that we're going to come together in a greater way to fight, push back, organize to ensure that we address the wealth gap in the state of North Carolina. There's so many wonderful people here in the state, activists, educators, faith-based leaders who are working together even today, trying to figure out what we need to be doing collaboratively to not only protect our democracy, but to ensure that people have a better quality of life.
Well, Reverend Corin, I always try to find a positive or somewhat of a good way to end a particular program. And I believe you just stated somewhat of a nice way and somewhat of an honest assessment on how to end this particular topic matter that we was discussing this morning on the Face-to-Face Talk Show. As I ask all of the guests towards the end of the program, if there's any last words or any last statements that you would like to let people know about, feel free to express yourself.
I just think that it's important that we self-reflect, that we truly have a self-examination about what we have done and what more we can do to make everyone's life better. First, starting with making our lives better and our families' life better and our communities better. But we have to try to find a way to get back to our humanity and find a way to be more kind to one another, more loving towards one another, and helpful. I remember a time in our communities where, especially Black people, were very communal. We helped each other, whether it was a cup of sugar or whatever it was you needed, we helped each other. We have to get back to that way of thinking. And I really believe if we do that, we're all going to be better for it.
Right. Well, those last words are well taken. And again, it was a pleasure having you back on AccessTV.org network as a guest on the Face-to-Face Talk Show. I really appreciate you giving up your early time out in the West Coast of California to get up this morning for this particular show. And I look forward to possibly speaking to you in the new year as well. And keep up the good work. You are making a tremendous difference in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg, North Carolina area. Thank you.
Thank you so much. God bless you.
You're welcome. Thank you, too. Okay, this is Jonathan Small. I just enjoyed hosting this edition of the Face-to-Face Talk Show with the president of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg NAACP chapter, and I thought she brought a real honest, accurate assessment of how she sees and views the racial wealth gap that exists in North Carolina. And she has a lot of other strong assets beyond just one particular topic matter that we were discussing this morning. Currently have a show already lined up. I will be doing another face-to-face talk show next week, if it's God's willing. And until I see you out there again, have a very blessed day and keep the faith. Thank you.